Hello, today Kimberly and I are going to talk about effective resource utilization in a growing business. We are in the people business, professional services, and have had multiple fast growing businesses that ultimately one of the key things you need to worry about is utilization. So, are my people being properly utilized? And a lot of times that's thought of as a percentage. Are we at a certain number of people being utilized or a percentage of people being utilized? But effective people utilization is bigger than that. So we want to first start with what is our definition of resource utilization when you're managing projects or portfolios of projects. So how do I effectively manage the utilization of people in these portfolios of projects? So Kimberly, talk about not specifically just what the one metric is around utilization, but what is true once you have effective people utilization?
So some of the things that are true, so it's funny because I have a sticky note. Um, I just did a workshop with some executive team for services organization, and every one of them got that sticky note at some point during the workshop. And I think you're calling it out correctly, Matt, because people start talking about resource utilization, then they think of people as resources. People are not printers; they're not interchangeable. You can't just unplug one and plug another one in. And that applies when we're looking across your organization and you're managing utilization. It's not just about the numbers. It's about making sure that you have the right people in the right places for the work that you're doing. And it's also making sure that you have work that people want to do. So if you're effectively managing utilization and you know what's coming, you know when people are going to be on the bench, you're using their time on the bench effectively so that they feel like they're doing something productive. You're able to minimize non-planned bench time if you do have it, so you know what's available. You're keeping people busy. And then that allows you to plan your bench time, and it allows you to plan for growing your people and optimizing how they're working against your projects. If you don't do those things, then you're in danger of either your people being underutilized, which means your good people are going to get bored, or overutilized, which means your people are going to get burned out. Either of those will cause you to have a higher attrition rate or lower retention rate, flip sides of the coin. And a higher attrition rate is going to also impact your utilization. So there's an amount of time that it costs you to ramp somebody up if you have to replace somebody on a project because they've left your company. So if your people are happy, they're less likely to leave, and if you have lower attrition, higher retention rate, then you have that lower turnover causes your projects to be more stable. It gives you better visibility, and it allows you to actually have a more consistent and predictable utilization moving forward, so that it's a self-perpetuating cycle.
So what you're going to find us talking about a bunch of things that actually impact your utilization versus your utilization itself. So people management is a part of good utilization. If you don't have good people management and leadership, you're not going to have a high utilization. Having a firm operational cadence so that you're making conscious choices well in advance of what you're doing around utilization. That operational cadence is something that's essential to have a high utilization. And then just good project leadership. That people are on a project, you're delivering it well, and so forth. So utilization is ultimately an output and a kind of a trailing indicator that says how well were we utilized, and there's a set of things we need to do proactively in order to affect that utilization. All right, let's start by talking about what is the target around utilization. So we're going to start with the numbers. So what outcome do we want? And this is going to partially vary by the type of business you are. If you're a staff augmentation firm that has lower margins, it's a necessity that your utilization is higher. So you may have a 97% utilization target, and that the majority of your people's time is spent billing at a client. If you're um, a strategy firm, you may have much higher rates, and your utilization target for your partners might be 40-50%. The number one thing is to start by knowing what your target is. How much of my people's time should be billable, maybe by role? How much of their time should be, personal development, learning new things, and so forth? Again, like if you're a tax accountant, there's a lot for you to learn in a year because the rules are constantly changing. So how much of my time should I be investing in learning? How much should I be investing in doing? And then how much of my time am I going to be teaching and doing other things? So we want to have a very conscious model of what our utilization target is. Um, and then we need to put things in place that allow us to hit that model. Um, let's start, Kimberly, by talking about what are the things that would actually prevent us from hitting that model. If you have a billable target, you have amount of time you want to invest, you've gone and created this model, you figure out that your margins can support it. What are the things that could get in your way?
A couple of the things that can get in your way are you talked about supply and demand, and that's absolutely true. You could set up the best model in the world, but if your sales team is not delivering projects, then you don't have anywhere to put people on, so they can't be utilized, right? So if you don't have a healthy pipeline and if you're not aligning to what projects you actually have available, then your model's not going to be successful. You also need to make sure that you're mapping again to the people in the model. So making sure that people have what they need as individual humans in order to be successful and feel successful. Um, the other thing that get in the way of your model is unplanned time off. So if you're not working with your team members to align around when time is coming out of your schedule, we used to always ask like, hey, at least let us know if you have an idea like what month you're taking time. Let us know. And it sounds like a little thing. Oh, well, someone's taking a week off. But if you have 100 people taking a week off, that's a big impact to your utilization. That's a big impact to your plan. So making sure that you're planning around all of those other things, and that you're also building in a little budget because things are going to happen. Things happen. Somebody may get sick. If someone's sick and it's a T&M project, you're actually not billing that day. Something may happen with the project. It may wrap early. There may be an issue. So you always want to have a little bit of buffer built in as well to deal with some of the unplanned things. And then make sure that your sales team is actually delivering the projects and feeding the queue so that you don't have to worry about whether or not you have somewhere to put your people.
Yeah. So as a kind of a professional services team that is kind of at the higher margin, higher value, it's essential that you find time to invest in your team, invest in your people, do these things. And it's almost it feels a little bit the opposite in that what we're going to tell you is that you have to be maniacal about any wasted time, so that is there a gap between projects that could be avoidable? Is there underbilling happening because of bad communication? Is there a slowdown in the recruitment process so I'm not filling these positions fast enough? Like, you have to be laser focused on these things and looking at what's happening in the future in order to prevent them from happening, right? So that's almost like you're a penny pincher and so forth. But the reason is you need to protect that investment so that you can use it strategically. You can have quarterly meetings, you can have get-togethers with your team, you can send them to training, you can strategically use that time. And if you let that time waste away by things that were avoidable, then you're not going to have the time to invest strategically, in your people and in your organization.
So let's talk more, Matt, about how do we optimize our resource utilization or people utilization, as I like to say. Like, what are some things that we can do to leverage the tactics so we can have a better strategy?
Yeah. So the first thing people will come to is, I really need a strategy to get supply and demand to match. And in a growing organization, it may be in any organization. I don't think that's ever going to happen. You're not going to be able to control supply and demand. So therefore, you're going to have to be able to predict what's going to happen with supply and demand. But so my ultimate goal is I always would want demand to exceed supply. So my demand for people is going to exceed my supply of people. And you may see that as a challenge or a problem, but I'm growing, and if my demand exceeds my supply, I have a lot more leverage. I can be more picky about the type of work I get. I can be more picky about what people go into which roles because they have choices. And I'm going to be optimized. Now, obviously, if my demand exceeds my supply too much over time, then I'm going to have a credibility issue in that I can't deliver what people have wanted to supply. But you're in a much stronger and better position if your demand exceeds your supply than if your supply exceeds your demand. So as soon as your supply exceeds your demand significantly, now you start discounting things, you put people into roles that they're not perfectly fit for, and you start this downward spiral that's hard to get out of. So you want your supply to exceed your demand, and then you say, okay, now how do I then balance, within that, knowing that there's an imbalance, how do I then manage that? And that's where having a cadence, constantly looking at what's happening, having systems that provide me 2 or 3, 4 months of visibility so I can know if that's getting greater, say I'm more than 10% short people, that I need to accelerate hiring, or if I'm starting to see that I have much more supply than demand, what can I change in order to increase that demand, so get more projects, get more work. So having those cadences, having that visibility, and then looking at how am I constantly able to make decisions, but have that slight imbalance where my demand's exceeding my supply. So is it frustrating? So you've been in this area where demand exceeds supply. What's the frustrations of that?
Demand exceeding supply is an excellent frustration to have. It just means that you're having communications with clients about we're not able to start a project on time. I think the only problem, the time when that causes an issue, is if when you get a little bit antsy and you rob from one thing to start another. So making sure that you're being very strategic in how you're handling that. I think demand exceeding supply is always a good problem to have. When supply exceeds demand, that is not a good problem to have, because then we have a situation where people start to get antsy. We don't have people doing work that they want to do. We also are more likely to take work that is not aligned with the quality of work that we want to take, because we're concerned about meeting numbers, right? So if I've got 40 people sitting on the bench and I plan to have 10 people sitting on the bench, we get very less picky about the type of projects that we take, because we want to make sure our people are billable, because the most important thing is to keep our people employed and to be able to continue to feed and house our folks, right? Which means that, again, we don't get to pick which projects we take. We're going to take anything that comes in the door so that we can get our people billable. If we have 10 projects to pick from and 6 projects worth of people, we can pick the right projects for our people.
Yeah, and one thing to find is when our demand exceeds our supply, the most important thing for a client, because almost always I can go to a client and say, I don't have the right team for you today. It's going to be 3 weeks, or it's going to be 6 weeks, right? If it's a new project they're starting up, a lot of times, we know about projects well enough in advance that we can plan the start date and make the project effective. What's frustrating is if I can't give them an answer. If they say, can you start tomorrow? My answer is usually, we usually can start faster than you. Can you have all your paperwork in place? And they'll say, yeah, you're probably right. And then they say, but when can you start? And if I can give an answer, that's great. If I don't know the answer, or I don't trust that we have the capacity to bring in people fast enough, or that we have the clarity on when people are coming available. That's really frustrating not to be able to give an answer. Even if the answer isn't what the client wants or it's in the future, that's manageable. Not being able to give an answer is frustrating. So part of this resource utilization is make sure that you have the data, have the information, have a predictable recruiting process so that you can give an answer, even though it might not be the exact answer the client or the project team might want. All right, so let's go from like how do I optimize this to what are the things that should guide my decisions? What are the metrics and KPIs that I should use to monitor utilization? So Kimberly, let's start by just like what is the utilization KPI directly? So when you look at a utilization report or a bench report, what is it telling you?
That one's really easy. It's telling you what is the percent of time that your folks' time is being billed. So, for example, if someone has 40 hours in a week and they have a 100% utilization target, which I don't recommend, that's not healthy. You expect them then to be, if they're 100% utilized, it means they're billing all 40 of those hours. If someone had a 40-hour a week utilization target, 100%, and they're billing 20 hours a week, that means they're at 50% utilization. That means they have another 50% of their time that you can put on something else, which not ideal again, but it's simply a percentage of time that you're using based on, again, what your target of billable time is. So if you're targeting that everyone is 90% billable, if they're billable 90% of the time, they're 100% utilized.
Another simple metric we use is the variance or the utilization variance. So what is the utilization variance?
A utilization variance is saying I expect Matt to bill 40 hours this week. And then at the end of the week, Matt submits a timesheet for 35 hours. I now have a variance between what I had thought was going to be billed and what's actually billed. And so there's a look back variance, an actuals variance, and there's also a projection variance. What we just talked about is a look back. It's an actuals variance. It's saying we had a variance between what we expected to bill and what we actually billed. Those are the worst kind because you can't fix it, right? It's in the past. You can't go back and reclaim those 5 hours that we lost. And obviously we weren't planning correctly because we were expecting something different than what actually happened. Being able to look forward and do a projection variance is a much better situation because if we're looking forward and saying, all right, we're expecting to be 100, our team to be 100% utilized in the month of March, and then something changes on a project or a projection and we look and we say, now we're, 50% utilized and we have a variance between those two. If we're looking in the future, we're able to actually do something to fix that variance in our overall company utilization so that we can keep our people occupied and keep our margins where they need to be.
All right, so when we're looking at maximizing utilization or effectively managing utilization, we've got the target, we've got the utilization percent, we have our backwards looking variance and our forward looking variance. And all of those are measurements of how you're performing, but they're kind of trailing indicators about how you're performing. Some of them are leading indicators in that they're looking at what do we think it's going to be next month and how is that changing and trending. But as we talked about, there's other things that affect your utilization that are really leading things. Things around metrics around your sales, metrics around your recruiting, metrics around your people health or your turnover. Talk about a couple of those metrics and how they can impact your utilization.
Absolutely. I think people do make a mistake in only looking at that percent number of utilization and not looking at all the other things that feed into it. So we talked about demand and supply. So your sales metrics and then your retention attrition metrics are the two sides of that. So from a sales metric standpoint, if you're not able to trust the projection from your sales team, so if your sales team says we're going to, sell 100 worth of project, and every time they say that they only sell 50, then you're going to have a variance in the demand side, right? And so if you have a variance in the demand side, you're planning your supply to meet the demand, those two things have to meet in the middle, then you're going to have a variance in your utilization. You're going to have an issue with utilization. The flip side is true as well. If you are oversold and you are overpromised and you don't have enough people to meet that, so if your hiring is not keeping up, or if your turnover is higher than you expected, then on the flip side, you're going to have a situation where you've made promises that you can't keep, right? So you're going to either have people that are overutilized, which is unhealthy, which causes greater turnover, or you're going to have clients that are unhappy because you said you're going to do one thing, which is start a project like we talked about earlier, but you're not able to actually start the project because you don't have the people to do it. So when you're looking at all of your metrics across the board, you want to look at, how are our sales metrics doing? Are we delivering what we say we're going to deliver from a sales standpoint? And if not, what are we going to do to fix it? Are we hiring when we need to hire? And do we have a hiring cadence in place so that we're hiring what we need, not only to continue to grow the company, but also account for whatever our retention and attrition situation is? How is our people health? This is one that people ignore a lot, but it's huge for utilization. What does our people and our team health look like? If I can look forward and say, hey, I have the right amount of projects for the amount of people that I have. I'm hiring what I need. But if I have a lot of people who are unhappy, that's going to increase. That's a leading indicator of future attrition. And so those are things that if you're not looking at those on a frequent enough basis, you're not able to make the corrections that you need to make or pull the levers as we talk about in order to fix it. So if I have people that are unhealthy or migrating towards being unhealthy, the sooner I can get in front of that, the sooner I can improve my chances of them not leaving, right? Which then means I don't have to onboard someone new. It reduces my churn. It makes my teams more effective. And then team health and people health are not exactly the same, right? So there's individual person health. There's also health of teams. Health of teams is important because it impacts the individual health, but it also impacts project delivery. So if you have an unhappy team, that impacts their ability to deliver a project. How you're delivering your projects impacts not only your utilization, because it can make your project run long, which changes your plan, and anything that changes your plan causes a variance. It can also cause your clients to be unhappy, which reduces your potential for future for them buying from you, which impacts your sales, right? And again, it impacts your people health as well. So when you're thinking about utilization metrics, you really need to look at all of the things that go into it and not just that, simple number of what is my utilization percent. That's almost an output of all of the other things that you're managing.
Yeah. So if you're new to us, this might be new information, but if you've listened to our past videos, and I'm sure in our future videos, you're going to hear a couple themes coming through loud and clear. One is if you don't have strong cadences, you're not going to succeed with anything. But resource utilization and managing your people is one, right? So do you know what you're doing every day, every week, every month, every quarter, and are you effectively doing that? And then two, having the right systems in place that collect the data, fairly effortlessly and present it in a way that has the information and insights for you to make decisions. Those two things are essential to running a professional services organization, especially a growing professional services organization. So a lot of what Kimberly just talked about fits into those two categories. Do I have the right systems and data and information in front of me to make decisions? And then am I being disciplined and having a cadence to do that? If you have those two things in place, then managing resource utilizations, maximizing the opportunities for your people is a solvable problem. It's just a disciplined problem that you need to do over time and in order to effectively manage it. Thanks for your time, and we will talk more in the future.